A medieval castle was never just a dramatic stone building on a hill. At its core, a castle was a private fortified residence, usually built for a lord, noble family, royal authority, or military order. That definition separates it from a palace, mansion, or villa. Those buildings could be grand, comfortable, and even politically important, but their main purpose was not defense. A castle combined domestic life with military readiness. It was a place where people lived, stored resources, received visitors, made decisions, and prepared for violence. This is why castles feel so different from ordinary elite homes. Their architecture was shaped by fear, ambition, and control. Every wall, gate, tower, ditch, and approach carried a message. The owner had wealth, authority, and the ability to resist attack. European castles became especially important in the 9th and 10th centuries, after the weakening and breakup of Carolingian imperial power. As central authority fragmented, local lords and princes gained more independence. But independence also meant insecurity. Rival nobles, raiders, rebellious subjects, and shifting alliances made political life unstable. In that environment, a castle gave a local ruler a defensible base from which to govern. It allowed power to be anchored in a specific landscape. The castle did not simply protect the lord from the world outside. It helped create the lord's control over that world. A noble with a castle could command roads, oversee villages, collect obligations, and survive challenges that might destroy a less fortified household. The castle was both defensive and offensive. People often imagine defenders waiting behind walls, but castles also allowed their owners to project force outward. Soldiers could ride out from a castle to raid enemies, patrol territory, escort tax collectors, or pressure nearby settlements. Because the castle provided a secure place to retreat, it made aggressive action less risky. This dual purpose made castles powerful tools in feudal conflict. They were not passive shelters. They were military platforms embedded in the countryside. A castle near a road, bridge, river crossing, or border could influence who moved through the region and under what conditions. In practical terms, the castle turned geography into authority. Castles also functioned as centers of administration. Medieval power was not managed from distant office buildings. It was often exercised locally, through personal authority, landholding, law, and obligation. A castle could be the place where rents were collected, disputes were heard, military service was organized, and supplies were stored. Rural castles were often placed near resources that mattered to the community, such as mills, fertile land, water sources, or productive routes. Urban castles could dominate towns and control local populations. This meant the castle affected everyday life even when no siege was happening. For the people nearby, it was the visible headquarters of power, part courthouse, part tax office, part barracks, part warning. Many early castles in Northern Europe were not stone masterpieces. They were often built from earth and timber because those materials were faster and cheaper to use. A lord who needed immediate control over an area could not always wait for a vast stone fortress. Earthworks, wooden palisades, ditches, and raised mounds could create a strong defensive site relatively quickly. These early castles often exploited natural defenses. A steep hill, river bend, marsh, cliff, or narrow approach could make attack difficult before a defender even built a wall. Later generations frequently replaced timber with stone, not because the earlier castles were meaningless, but because stone lasted longer, resisted fire better, and looked far more permanent. The keep became one of the most recognizable symbols of castle power. It was often the strongest central structure, serving as residence, command post, storage area, and final refuge. If outer defenses failed, defenders might withdraw into the keep and continue resisting. But the keep was not only practical. Its height and mass made social hierarchy visible. From far away, people could see where the lord lived and where authority was concentrated. Inside, the keep might contain halls for formal gatherings, private chambers, and secure rooms for supplies or valuables. It showed how castle architecture blended functions. The lord's home was also a defensive position, and the defensive position was also a political stage. As siege warfare developed, castle design became more scientific. By the late 12th and early 13th centuries, builders increasingly focused on angles of defense and overlapping fields of fire. A simple wall could be impressive, but attackers who reached its base were difficult to target from directly above. Towers solved part of that problem by projecting outward from the curtain wall. From a tower, defenders could shoot along the wall's face, hitting attackers from the side. This flanking fire made assaults much more dangerous. Arrow slits allowed defenders to fire while remaining protected. Gatehouses became stronger and more complex, because the entrance was usually the most vulnerable point. The castle was becoming an integrated defensive system. Some later castles used polygonal layouts or concentric defenses. A concentric castle placed defensive lines within defensive lines, so that breaching the outer wall did not mean victory. Attackers could find themselves trapped in exposed spaces, still under fire from a higher inner wall. This design multiplied the defender's advantages and made every stage of an attack costly. These ideas were influenced by several traditions, including experiences from the Crusades and older models such as Roman fortifications. But the broader lesson is that castles were not static. They evolved as military knowledge moved across regions and as attackers became more capable. The strongest castles were built not only with stone, but with accumulated experience. Not every castle feature was purely military, even when it had defensive origins. A moat could slow attackers, complicate tunneling, and make walls harder to reach. But over time, moats also became symbols of status, separating the lord's residence from ordinary space. Long, winding approaches could have military value by exposing visitors or attackers, but they also created psychological drama. Anyone approaching the castle had to experience its scale, pass under its walls, and feel the owner's dominance before even reaching the gate. Castles were designed to be seen and felt. They shaped emotion as well as movement. In a society where authority depended heavily on visible rank, architecture became a form of political communication. The introduction of gunpowder did not instantly destroy the castle age. Gunpowder appeared in Europe during the 14th century, but early artillery was limited. Many castles remained useful for decades because cannon were not yet powerful enough, mobile enough, or reliable enough to make every stone wall obsolete. The real shift came in the 15th century, when artillery improved to the point that high masonry walls could be battered apart. Traditional castles had been designed for a world of ladders, arrows, siege towers, and earlier engines. Powerful cannon changed the basic physics of defense. Tall walls that once seemed intimidating became targets. Their height offered visibility, but their vertical surfaces were vulnerable to sustained bombardment. In response, military architecture moved away from the classic castle and toward artillery fortifications. Star forts used lower, thicker, angled walls and projecting bastions designed for cannon warfare. They were extremely serious defensive structures, but they were not castles in the traditional sense. They were not primarily private fortified residences where a lord governed local society. At the same time, elite domestic life was changing. Wealthy families increasingly preferred residences that were comfortable, fashionable, and open, rather than cramped military strongholds. Chateaux and country houses could display status without pretending to survive a modern siege. The old castle had once combined home, fortress, office, and symbol. Under artillery pressure, those roles began to separate. From the 18th century onward, castles returned as romantic images rather than military necessities. Gothic revival architecture produced mock castles that borrowed towers, battlements, and medieval silhouettes without serving a serious defensive purpose. These buildings reveal how powerful the idea of the castle remained after its practical decline. The castle became a memory of nobility, danger, security, mystery, and old authority. But the real medieval castle was more complex than the romantic version. It was a working machine of power. It protected a household, commanded land, organized administration, controlled resources, projected force, and shaped how people understood authority. To understand castles is to understand that medieval power was not abstract. It was built into the landscape, in earth, timber, and stone. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.